Welcome to a rather large video that I've produced for you today. In this video we are going to be looking at some pretty epic Bollywood movies. I am launching this investigation because I myself haven't really seen that many Indian films excluding RRR. RRR is what started this. That was my first foray into the world of Bollywood.
Do you know Desi Nach?
What's Desi Nach?
I want this video to be informative, not just for you, but for me. I want to see what I can learn about Indian culture and Indian cinema from the films that I cover in this video. If all goes to plan, this will prove to be a very fruitful venture. Now before we get started, it's important that I point out a crucial distinction. So it turns out that India is quite a big place where many different languages are spoken. Among some of these languages are Hindi, Telugu, Tamil, Malayalam and Bengali, to name a few. Now before I just assumed that if a film came out of India then it was automatically considered to be a Bollywood film, but that's not actually the case. From what I understand, it's only Hindi language films that qualify as Bollywood movies. If the film was made in the Telugu language then that wouldn't make it a Bollywood film but rather a Tollywood film. And I'm not making that up. A Tamil language movie, on the other hand, is apparently a Kollywood film. I'm not sure as to whether Kollywood or Tollywood are just subcategories of Bollywood, or if they're more so their own thing. There's also the cinema of West Bengali. I just imagine it keeps splintering off into hundreds of different categories. And you also have to realise that Bollywood, I assume, like Hollywood, is a loose term. You don't call every Indian movie a Bollywood film any more than you would call every English language movie a Hollywood film. Like with films like Pig or The Witch, you wouldn't go around saying like, oh yeah, the famous Hollywood film Pig. It just doesn't fit. So yeah, it is important to just consider that maybe these are more so loose terms like Bollywood, Kollywood, all that. So the reason that I've brought all of this up is because not all of the films that I'll be covering today strictly qualify as Bollywood films. Some are in the Hindi language, but others are in the Tamil language or the Telugu language. With RRR even, I kept referring to that as a Bollywood film, but it's actually in the Telugu language, so technically it qualifies as a Tollywood film. I just thought this was an important distinction to make, and also it's pretty funny how there's multiple ones. There's not just Bollywood, but Kollywood and Tollywood. It's very funny, just replacing the first letter of the word Hollywood. Now I've picked out 5 films for this video so we can get a decent spread of data, but I also thought that I should check out a Bollywood soap opera first, so I found this random show called NAAGIN, and I decided to watch the first episode, the pilot. All I knew about this show going in was that it was about some evil woman who shapeshifts into a serpent or something. Now when I was looking for this show and I was going on YouTube to see different clips and trailers for different Bollywood TV shows, I noticed something kind of weird. I noticed that a ton of the YouTube thumbnails all proudly displayed the amount of views that the video had gotten. Like, hey, get a load of this guy, this KAITHI trailer pulled a whopping 15 million plus views, ain't that something? It's pretty cynical and cringe, you know, like I thought America was clout driven. Anyway, enough idle chit chat, we should really be beginning, so let's just jump right into this little bitch. Let's see what NAAGIN is saying then. These are the kind of technical fucking decisions I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of. Now this does contain a lot of the more obvious flaws that I would point out, but given what we're working with here, I feel like it's just redundant to even say. But yeah, the production value's kind of shit. Like, I think I was expecting that. And it's all dubbed. How many times did he say family then? What a weird way of phrasing something. Again, it's obviously the translation issue here, but usually people get late because of their mums. In my house, it's due to my young and restless dad. I launched this investigation to learn interesting cultural things about India and Bollywood and Tollywood and Kollywood, etc. I didn't just come here to see shit filmmaking. Come on. What a disaster of a watch this is. I've no idea what's going on. It's very visually expressive, and by visually expressive I mean visually obvious and blatant. Of all the ways to learn about these significant cultural rituals from other countries, this is probably the worst format in which to like showcase it for someone who knows nothing about it.
अपशगुन होने से बचा लिया, पंडित जी की दाढ़ी जलाने से बचा रहा था।
They have all the different types of music, all the different tones, like happy, goofy, quirky, scary, old, dramatic, and they just keep switching between them just completely abruptly.
तुम मुझसे शादी क्यों करना चाहती? तुम जानती हो ना कि
तुम मुझसे प्यार नहीं करती।
किसी भी हालत में उसके 25 साल के होने के पहले हो जानी चाहिए, नहीं तो जैसे ही ऋतिक 25
यार यही सोचती रहेगी कि कहीं मुझ पर कोई खतरा ना आ जाए।
तो फिर पंडित जी बताइए ना।
It's just a far more crude version to what I'm used to, because there's plenty of formulaic American media that use music like this, but not just so viciously back to back like that.
तो कोई बात नहीं ना, आप हमारे साथ बैठ जाओ किडो।
Kiddo? I'm not a kid. I'm 17.
क्या कह रही थी?
Now, this is when you feel like this. This is when you feel like this. Oh, now feel like this. Oh, quick, go.
एक मैं आदमी बन पाया हूं मैं। इस सूट बूट के पीछे अभी भी वो कहीं इंसान है।
It's like anime dialogue. Underneath this clever facade, there is an inner flawed man. She's just taking it so seriously. She's terrified.
बार-बार कहा है, उस बात को मत दोहराया करो कि उस रात तेरा ध्यान कहाँ था जब मैंने।
Look how disgustingly overlit it is. I feel like they're all going to turn to the camera and start like advertising toothpaste. I like within one scene, the change in music will like almost establish its own new scene within that scene, and it'll slow down. It'll be like, I heard you had a bad dream. It'll be like, everything will just stop and start again. Oh shit, he's run over someone. Do you reckon this is like the Bollywood Game of Thrones? Like everyone in India absolutely loves this, and I'm completely ignorant to that. I've fallen on one of the most culturally significant pieces of media in Bollywood history.
तो वो एक ही से है, अमृता दीदी से।
I love the way that was edited, that bit of comedic relief.
अमृता दीदी से।
Film is all about telling a story in a visual and interpretable way for a human. The way this thing is relaying information to my brain is something unholy.
सुंदर सी लड़की नहा रही होती और फिर एकदम अचानक से एक आवाज आती।
It's just the inverse of how to communicate something naturally. Like, does anyone here even care about making like high quality entertainment? Do they even care about the craft of filmmaking at all? All of this is just so indicative of someone who really just does not give a single shit.
ये ठाकुर है डाकू। Thank God हमारा नाम इनके नाम जैसा नहीं है।
There's no point in me watching this because it's nothing but just exposition and terrible storytelling. Everything about this is awful. I can just feel every single second of this because I'm so bored.
ये एक नागिन की बदले की पहली कड़ी है।
Okay. So it's just been horrendous actually. Shot like shit, awful production value, the acting is horrendous. The editing and pacing is the most interesting part about this thing. Obviously not because it's good, God no, but just in how bizarrely unique it is. As in it's so rushed and compacted that like 10 scenes happen within like the space of 5 seconds. The music is constantly changing, switching between really dark and serious to really stupid and comedic. Like it's and then it's like ba-dum. It's got a lot of bad Bollywood soap opera hallmarks, like reusing shots over and over again, weird moments of slow motion that make you feel like you're watching a YTP. This is like one of the most egregious, fucking retarded things I've ever seen. This has been a really poor case study towards learning more about Bollywood. I haven't really learned anything new about it. Hopefully the next thing will be a little bit more educational or something. TUMBBAD is a horror fantasy film set in the early 20th century. It is Hindi language, so that makes it a Bollywood film, baby, but again, loose terms. This turned out to be a hair darker than what I'd come to expect from your average Bollywood crowd pleaser. This was not a family-friendly one. For instance, right near the beginning, you see a guy getting jerked off. Well, that's pretty different, isn't it, for a Bollywood film? It's not PG-13 here. The only thing that I have to compare this to right now is NAAGIN, which it is substantially better than. In stark contrast to that abhorrent thing I just watched, TUMBBAD has really good production value. The sets and locations are detailed and convincing. The editing isn't being exploitative. The acting is way more downplayed and believable, so much more subtle and naturalistic. Ah yes, we're back to marginally tasteful filmmaking because the bar was set that low. It always feels good to see real lived-in locations. It's shot in quite an interesting way, almost like a documentary with this obvious handheld look. And the handheld camera makes everything a lot more energetic. It's much more involved with the action on screen. It's like the cameraman is along for the ride. The acting is still quite ham, but again, compared to other Bollywood media, it's much more believable. It would probably stick out like a sore thumb if compared to your average American film, but still, it's an improvement. There's still a shit in here like this. And this. As a small budget horror film, it's fairly unique. It had its own lore that was interesting to learn about. It's all about ancient gods and curses. It strikes me as an indie horror, an Indian indie horror like we have with The Ritual. Very small, stripped back and simple. I enjoyed the warped grandmother creature near the beginning who had very good makeup effects. A good amount of the horror visuals were pulled off practically, which was fun. There's some really cool body horror as this old man is essentially eaten by this big, fleshy, bloody wall.
See ya.
I enjoyed the first segment as well as the first act as we learned more about this evil ancient god who's essentially this big metaphor for greed. The film centers around this special golden treasure that the main character Vinayak becomes obsessed with. You see him as a boy, then later he grows up to be a young man, then finally he fathers a son. It chronicles his whole life and the lifelong effects of greed. There is this moment near the beginning where the main guy is talking to the grandmother creature thing, who is now this half person, half tree with hundreds of these branches stemming from her. And the guy says to her like, oh yeah, tell me where the treasure is and I'll give you half. And she's just there like, she's a tree. What the fuck is that thing gonna do with treasure? The second act veers into being a far more ordinary story about greed. You can see where it's going. It's far less interesting, and it was the horror aspect for me that gave this film flair. It's about greed, man's greed, and what it had to say on the subject was fairly simplistic and basic. Again, I only really found the horror elements of this film interesting. This British guy shows up at some point. You get a lot of these British characters in these Indian period pieces, because of course England occupied India as a colony in the past.
I've had enough of this nonsense! You two, out!
So you do get a lot of these English people, and they stick out like sore thumbs.
My promotion came through.
Get the fuck out of here, you smarmy fucks. The acting of the British characters is very jarring. There's nothing natural about it.
That little bird has been frequenting your house these past few weeks.
Obviously, as it's my own nationality, I can see right through the phoniness of it. Maybe this is the same quality as the rest of the acting, and I just can't see it because of the language barrier.
This is your last chance to be rich.
This is your last chance to be rich.
Never known you to be so generous.
So unnatural. There's even a few Indian songs that play over montages throughout the film. They're just there, regardless of whether or not they fit the tone. Every time there's someone smoking on screen, there's this disclaimer saying smoking is injurious to health. Fuck that shit, man. Not in our movies, not in our art. Later on, it gets back into the mythological horror stuff, and thus I got a little more engaged again. This old man climbs down inside this huge rectum and gets eaten by a monster. This is a neat set right here. This whole butthole area is actually supposed to be the womb of a goddess, which is very cool. Unfortunately, the penultimate evil monster isn't conveyed practically, so we're subjected to this PS3 cutscene. So the film concludes with the final statement of, you know, that whole greed thing, it's pretty shit. Haha, funny kid crying, haha, bad acting. Apparently this was the first Indian movie to be screened at the Venice International Film Festival. It is more of an experimental character study than a big flamboyant epic. It seems like one of those movies that a lot of Indian-based film enthusiasts would really like. It's a little more sensible and serious, niche and artistic. It looks to have made a decent amount of money and it seems fairly popular. It's got an 8.2 on IMDb. I feel like when I first finished TUMBBAD, I was far more favourable towards it than was deserved, maybe. Again, I was comparing it to NAAGIN, which was literally the worst piece of media I've ever seen. I'm not sure how TUMBBAD holds up against more competent movies. The acting still isn't all that great, it has a fair share of shoddy editing choices. As a fan of horror, it's got some fairly creative ideas, but it's just lacking in the overall execution. It is a fairly bang average movie. When it isn't being a strange horror film, it's this fairly basic and dull story about greed, which I didn't care for. So what did TUMBBAD teach us then? India has much stricter anti-smoking laws, I guess. So much so that they plaster their agendas over people's art, which is great. And so far, the batting average of editing, acting and overall filmmaking is still quite low. India, it is not looking good, you better step it up. BAAHUBALI, The Beginning, is quite a famous and widely celebrated Telugu/Tamil language film that makes it a Tollywood movie. It's one of the biggest Indian movies ever made and is currently the 11th highest grossing Indian film of all time. It's directed by S.S. Rajamouli, who is the same director as RRR. Apologies if I'm pronouncing that name wrong. What this movie is almost like a Indian version of Ben-Hur. It's this giant period piece epic. And it's funny because it opens with this little message that says, thanks to all our family and friends who supported us over the years, like it's this little home movie when it's this massive big blockbuster. Oh, just thank you for supporting us with getting this little thing made.
ऊपर भूत प्रेत रहते हैं, बच्चों को चीर फाड़ के खा जाएंगे। मैं ऊपर जाऊंगा माँ।
You'll be pleased to know that the dubbing is back.
जिसने मन्नत मानी वही पूरी करे।
We're introduced to our main man, BAAHUBALI himself, who is extremely strong and buff. During the opening of the film, we see him trying to scale this mountain, and that was fun. Despite the fact that he keeps falling off these sheer cliff faces and at no point sustains a horrifically debilitating injury. We get this song that's just bigging BAAHUBALI up, like, oh, no man could possibly even compare to this amazing specimen. It's overwhelming how courageous and gallant this person is. It's almost hard to look at. He's so bloody cool. The killer of fear, his anger knows no bounds. He fell off a cliff again. Oh, it's okay, he landed in some vines. Despite how childish and whimsical these stories may seem, these films are not for kids. They're full of gore. It can be like The Lion King in some areas, but then Game of Thrones in others. There's just a little tonal disparity going on. Again, the way in which these films get their stories across is completely foreign to what a Western cinema consumer may be used to. I do find it intriguing, particularly how this action set piece is put across. This musical montage of him and this woman singing, and then you have the lyrics just telling us what we should be feeling. It's a different way of telling a heroic adventure story that's unique to Indian cinema. Like, this is apparently a normal way of conveying something to the audience. So they're saying that their friend has been taken captive in a very expository manner, and then we get a shot of the captive friend who is at an entirely different location, and then it cuts back to a zoom in of this woman's angry face.
नगर के चौराहे पर खड़ा किया।
I mean, it does get the point across, to give it credit. It's just very bizarre. As of right now, I've gotten used to it because I've seen a few of these films and it's just such a common thing. Everything is extremely intense and played so seriously. So many hammy, overdramatic reaction shots. Like, you decided to call off the wedding. We've located your missing daughter. All these reaction shots that you see in these Indian films may be my favourite aspects about them.
Mali, this is for her.
Sometimes they even slow it down a bit just to add that extra bit of emphasis. A lot of the storytelling is also done through this method that I can only really describe as not show don't tell, but sing don't tell. To put ideas across, give us information about a character or the world in which they inhabit, they'll just make a song about it where the lyrics insist upon the audience that this man is extremely strong and brave, or these two are madly in love, they've just fallen in love right this second, it took 2 seconds for them to fall in love apparently. And that becomes a problem because this film never really earns these beats. A character will walk up to another character and then there'll just be a song about how much like they hate each other. It's like, oh, I really hate you, or you're my sworn enemy, or I really want to get you. All these years I've been plotting to overthrow you. Grr. And it's essentially expositional dialogue just done through song. A man says one word to a woman, they dance and sing about how they're falling in love, and then all of a sudden we're supposed to believe that their love knows no bounds. So now we're about to see this kingdom and learn about how mighty it is through the storytelling. So we get some lyrics in a song about how mighty the kingdom is. So I don't really know what's happening here in this scene. For context, in this scene they're trying to track someone down, that's why they're at this location. He asks this merchant for loads of milk, then he breaks all of these milk vases so everyone can drink. And then this big egg-shaped thing made out of ropes appears and everyone starts to unravel it and there are 3 beautiful women underneath. Then they start singing and then he starts getting all friendly with these 3 women. And none of that even mattered because whilst that was going on, this other guy just went off and found the guy they were looking for. And then the scene ends, like that dance literally contributed nothing to the plot or narrative. When comparing this to the Western epics that I'm used to watching, I didn't get that immersed in the story. And this is chiefly down to how ridiculous the acting is, because it's almost like they're having a laugh.
क्यों? मैं हूँ कौन? मैं हूँ?
I don't really care about any of these characters because I can never take them seriously.
तुम सांस तक भुगतने दो.
I can't enjoy this like I can The Lord of the Rings, where I care about all of the characters and have an emotional bond with the story. It's nigh impossible to care about anyone because of how stupid everything is. All it has is the novelty of being really goofy, but after a while that novelty starts to wear off. It's like, here, am I really supposed to feel sad for these characters when it's doing shit like this? You know, of all the things that I thought may happen next in this fight, the 3 of them rolling in the sand together like a couple of fighting toddlers was not one of them. It's more about the spectacle than it is about the story. The story is there, but it's more so a loose framework for all of these dance numbers and huge action set pieces. And maybe that does work for some people, but action is just fast-paced drama, and you can't have any meaningful drama without a properly maintained story. Like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films are really goofy, but I still care about most of of the characters. I'm still on board with their struggle. It's unfortunate because, at least as of right now, when going into these films, you have to say to yourself, well, I'm not really expecting any good acting here, am I? And then you start becoming accustomed to this lower standard of acting, but that shouldn't really excuse it. Just because you've gotten used to it doesn't make it okay. The story and plot is very procedural. It's like, I'm going to do this now because this is the part of the movie where I do said thing. Everyone just announces everything, like what emotions they're feeling or what goals they have. And if it's not just announcing these things, it's singing them. It's never properly conveyed why they'd want to do any of the things they're doing. Like BAAHUBALI as a character, vague motivations, you're never really on his level. You never get inside his mind, like why is he doing this? Well, he's doing it because he's BAAHUBALI, of course. He has taken on this quest because he had a nice shag. We're supposed to actually care about this relationship, even though all they gave us was this dance number insisting that they'd fallen in love. I can buy BAAHUBALI being taken with her because that was well set up. There was a decent amount of scenes devoted to him becoming infatuated with this woman. He finds her mask that's shaped like her face and then he kind of molds it into the dirt. That's a really cool visual scene. Because that's when he first sees this woman's face and he becomes madly enchanted with her. The problem lies with her just immediately becoming smitten with him. It was really stupid, like, oh, she's a woman, I guess, and that's her main function, just to fall in love with a man. It's basic instinct, she can't control herself.
केवल महाशिव ही ऐसा कर सकते हैं.
Before the two do meet, there are these scenes where he secretly draws these patterns on this woman's hands without her noticing. That's a cute way of building up what could have been a good relationship, ignoring the creepiness you could interpret from it. What happened there? He kind of assaults her here. Now, what do I know about love? This is just how you do it. He forcibly changed her into an effeminate woman. That didn't take long. She loves him now. The romantic dance number itself was really fun. The set for that was really nice and pretty, even though it kind of came out of nowhere. However, you've still got the obvious dubbing, and that does take away from the musical performances. I don't know why they always dub shit. When it comes to the visual effects of this film, it's this strange mix of stuff that looks extremely wobbly and unconvincing, and then things that genuinely do look quite cool. A lot of it's fake, but some of it's real. This 3D model of the castle, for instance, it may not look all that convincing, but it's a little neat. At least it's kind of detailed. There's an avalanche set piece, and at that moment I was like, oh shit, this is going to be epic, because it's an epic film after all. It's a big budget movie. But then the scene goes and looks like this. Like here, there is zero polish to the CGI. What is that? There's a CGI bullfight that looks quite rough. And then there's this watermark in the corner of the screen that says CGI, like, yeah, never could have guessed that. Just in case this deviously rendered CGI fooled you and you actually thought that an animal's getting hurt. They seem to do that pretty much every time a CGI animal is on screen or in some kind of danger. But then when there's a scene where they straight up decapitate one animal, there's nothing. Like, that's okay, I guess. But regardless, why do they feel the need to tell their audiences that? Why do you feel the need to remind them that they're watching a movie? It's just over-explaining everything. It's a little totalitarian, if you ask me. The last 50 minutes of this film is one giant flashback. It's like half of the movie dedicated to it. We get this huge action set piece, the best set piece of the entire film, all in a flashback, mind you. I did really enjoy that scene, though. I don't know why that's sped up, but it sort of works. That's what makes me so conflicted with these CGI set pieces. It's so obviously fake looking, but some of these visuals are so imaginative that you can't help but enjoy them. Overall, despite my negatives, this certainly isn't a boring movie. I was more entertained by this than I was TUMBBAD. There weren't any boring low points where it started to sag. I didn't like it as much as RRR, but it's still a lot of fun. Certainly not perfect, has undeniable flaws, but it's definitely not a chore to sit through. There's a quote on the poster, "There's rarely a dull moment in BAAHUBALI the beginning." Hard to argue with that. The only thing it's lacking is making you properly invested with the characters. There is a second part to this film, as it does end on a cliffhanger. BAAHUBALI The Conclusion, I think it's called. I think I'll watch that. I had fun with this.
BAAHUBALI! BAAHUBALI! BAAHUBALI!
For this next one, I decided to travel far back in time to the year 1948 with the film SHAHEED. SHAHEED, which roughly translates to The Martyr, is a drama romance historical piece set in the 1940s during India's struggle for independence over the British colonisation. This was the highest grossing film of 1948, a fun fact for you. Before I proceed with this review, there is something I should know. At the time, Hindi cinema was simply known as Bombay cinema. The term Bollywood was apparently first coined sometime in the 60s or 70s. Bombay was the former name for Mumbai, which is the capital city of the Indian state of Maharashtra. Maharashtra. I said it right. Fuck yeah! This is all just to preface that when SHAHEED was made, it wouldn't have been called a Bollywood film, rather a film of Bombay cinema. But onto the film itself now. The style of filmmaking here is much more familiar as opposed to BAAHUBALI or RRR. It's very traditional, it's pretty much the same as an old American movie. The acting is still quite theatrical, but that's to be expected with a movie this old. For its time, it has some really interesting cinematography that I enjoyed seeing. Some very nice blocking here and there. There's this shot with this superimposed image in it, which has to be quite impressive. You'll be pleased to know that the musical numbers are back again. It's nice to know that even back then they still had them. It's been a mainstay convention of Bollywood films dating as far back as the 1930s apparently. The story is centered around the character Ram, who we see grow up to be a vehement supporter of Indian independence, so much so that he believes in using violent means to attain freedom, which obviously stands in stark contrast to the pacifistic ideologies that were being preached by Gandhi at the time. You know Gandhi, he was pretty big around this time I think. The story also heavily revolves around the romance narrative between Ram and his love interest Sheila, which I didn't expect to like as much as I did. It was a very classical love story. Theatrical, tragic, well written, well acted. I got quite invested in this relationship, more so than I did anything in BAAHUBALI or TUMBBAD. First time I've actually fucking cared about the characters in these films. And yes, even back then they had reaction shots, just look at this. Done it again, they can't help themselves.
Mr. and Mrs. Deepak.
Oh, they just spoke English all of a sudden. That completely took me off guard. That was very jarring to hear.
Mr. and Mrs. Deepak.
Most of the aforementioned musical numbers are about the romance between these two characters. Where these musical numbers differ from that of BAAHUBALI's, however, is that the lyrics talk about themes and ideas that have already been properly established. BAAHUBALI just tells us what we're supposed to be thinking. SHAHEED makes us feel emotions, and then by the time someone comes on and starts singing about the themes of the film, it's just there to complement the already existing beats. The lyrics represent what the audience is thinking / feeling. Obviously this film is super old, so the audio quality is quite tinny, and that did hurt the woman's vocal performance. There was also one song near the end that felt inappropriately placed given how dreary the situation had gotten within the story. As the story got more and more serious and severe, I could have done without these fanciful songs. And there was a lot of story to chew on. It was almost like a play. It didn't necessarily have the most convincing sets 100% of the time, but that didn't bother me because again, it's like a play. The focus is more so on the characters and the drama. The sets are really flimsy and simple. Shit, he almost took down the old wall there. The footage is quite rough and scratched up, and there's even some missing frames here and there. I imagine that's down to complications with preserving this film for all this time. But it does make it all the more authentic though, like, you know, classic film grain, classic gritty footage, yes. We get an epic fail here where it breaks the 180-degree rule. This film is also very political and historically rich with its subject matter. The ideological discussions that the film puts forth are very interesting to listen to, mainly being about the two opposing ideologies going on in India at the time, the violent versus the non-violent path to independence. There's a scene at the beginning where all of the main characters are still children, and it foreshadows how the entire story will unfold. So Ram, Sheila and Vinod are having dinner. Ram says that he wants to be Jawaharlal Nehru, who is a famous anti-colonial Democrat at the time. Sheila then says that she would want to be Kamala Nehru, who is Jawaharlal's wife, foreshadowing the two's future romantic involvement with each other. Finally, Vinod states that he will be a police officer and arrest Ram and put him in prison. Fitting, seeing as how Vinod would become the primary antagonist of the film, acting on the behalf of the British Empire to thwart Ram's rebellion. Then Ram and Sheila tease Vinod for being a toady boy, which is essentially like saying he's a simp for the British Empire. Ram and Vinod then start fighting. Vinod actually pins Ram, but then Sheila starts hitting Vinod to help Ram, and then Sheila and Ram team up to beat on Vinod. This essentially sets the stage for the entire dynamic that these three characters will have with each other throughout the film. Ram and Vinod being at constant odds with one another, while Sheila occasionally steps in to aid Ram. So yeah, Shaheed possessed a very good story, a story about rebellion and forbidden love. There's an amazing courtroom speech near the end where it talks about how unfortunate Ram was to be a hero at the wrong time in history. There's a really profound line that says, an unsuccessful revolution is rebellion, but a successful revolt is a revolution. Highlighting the fact that based on which direction the pendulum swings, you could be either the hero or the villain. We obviously look back on that whole crisis as a time of peaceful protest, all of the things Gandhi was preaching. The violent anti-colonialists were much more so stigmatised. But when you consider how abhorrently the British Empire was abusing the state of India, essentially raping the land, you can't help but sympathise with people who opted for more violent methods. Because the British Empire were monumental twats to India. Don't get me started on Bengal during wartime. Holy shit, they got royally fucked. Shaheed is a story about sacrifice. Ram gave up a life of comfort and prestige to fight for India's freedom. He let his reputation be tarnished in the name of independence. Similarly, Sheila sacrificed a life of happiness when she married Vinod to ensure that her brother was released from prison. And the whole idea of it being called the martyr kind of fits in with the whole theme of sacrifice as well. So Ram ends up being executed for his crimes against the state. There is a song at the end that sings about how great martyrdom is. Obviously because Ram's getting executed for a noble cause, but it is still a little bit weird. वतन के नौजवान शहीद हर एक जवान शहीद हो तेरे लहू से जाग उठेगी इस चमन की जिंदगी It's like, fuck yeah, martyrdom, ram's blood will nourish the soil of future India. Getting killed for causes is great, more people should do it. Again, there is one more song at the end, and the tone didn't really match the emotions I was feeling relating to the story. Ultimately, however, I think the film is just highlighting the selflessness of Ram's sacrifice, what he did for India, the almost thankless role he played, and it's a very tragic and illustrative ending. Oh, but wait a minute, yeah, there's an extra looking at the camera, just completely ruined the whole film. Overall, this was full of substance. It was a classic tale like the films of old Hollywood where you get heavily invested. It's easily my favourite of the selection so far. Nacho, 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 nacho. Three Idiots is the next film on the agenda, and it is a 2009 Hindi language movie about the exploits of three friends during their college years. This one is a famous one. It's been on my radar for quite a long time now. It's one of the most popular Bollywood movies of all time, I think. One of the most critically acclaimed Bollywood movies of all time as well. When it came out, it was the highest grossing film in India of that year. It's in the top 250 films on IMDb, sitting at 84th. Having now seen it myself, I can understand why it is so beloved, because it sort of has everything. It's extremely accessible for not just Indian audiences, but for foreign audiences as well. It contains strong emotional beats of every genre. It has an all-encompassing story about how to live your life, face your fears, follow your passions, break the conventions, don't get caught up with the rat race of life. It's a very feel-good and motivational narrative. Of the selections so far, this was probably the easiest to power through, and that's saying something because going into this, I was concerned about the runtime. This is a 2 hour and 44 minute comedy drama movie. Like, it's fat, but I enjoyed myself for most of the runtime. It's also very stylistic and well shot, so I can imagine many Indian-based film enthusiasts having this as one of their favourite films of all time. Or maybe not, maybe they actually hate this film and they're sick of people like me thinking that all Indian film fans love Three Idiots. Like with most of the modern Indian movies I've seen so far, the lighting of this film isn't exactly subtle. It's extremely bright, not even the slightest bit of shadow is allowed. I think this is most likely done to complement the dance sequences, which are a frequent occurrence in these films. Every colour on screen needs to pop off, so it's essentially like shooting a movie like a music video. The dance numbers themselves, however, regarding Three Idiots were very elaborate and lively. I'd be bouncing along with the music every time a song was on. It kind of like looked something like this. I don't know how to dance. You know, like just vague movements like. Although it is called and is about three idiots, the character of Rancho is definitely the focal point of the movie, and he was brilliant, as in he was just a really personable and charismatic character that you loved following, and most of my enjoyment came from just watching him, looking to see what he'd do next. His persona is definitely the hook of the film. He's an extremely likeable and engaging main character like a Ferris Bueller or a Jordan Belfort. The things his character stood for and represented were very pungent and philosophical.
किसी महापुरुष ने कहा है कि कामयाब होने के लिए नहीं, काबिल होने के लिए पढ़ो। सक्सेस के पीछे मत भागो। Excellence का पीछा करो.
He essentially represents the purest form of intelligence and the process of educating oneself. He seeks knowledge only out of passion and a desire to make the world a better place. He's like Elon Musk. In this manner, he stands in direct contrast to the predominant mindset of the Indian education system, where it's all about academia, prestige, and wealth. He has some brilliant quotes, like for instance, he says, "Pursue excellence and success will chase you with its pants down." I wasn't expecting this level of profundity from this film. It's interesting because you can't really put this movie in a box. It strikes such a bizarre and specific tone. Some could actually call it tone deaf if they wanted to. The film skips along with the attitude of a family-friendly, feel-good crowd pleaser, yet it'll contain some really dark and dour subject matter. For one, it deals quite closely with suicide. When the awful tragedies do happen, the film gets a little bit more serious, but it still retains this partially whimsical tone, which results in some very odd scenes where you're not quite sure what you're supposed to be feeling. Early on in the movie, a student succumbs to the overwhelming amount of pressure put on him by the head professor of the school, and he takes his own life. The suicide happens right after this extremely joyous dance number as well. We go from this to this. And because of that drastic change in tone, it really did catch me off guard. I literally exclaimed like, Jesus! Jesus! I was so young! Like they were successful in shocking me if that's what they were going for. Like I did not see that coming. Then there's the funeral scene right after, and the silly tone is still there because this is the grieving father. The film's also full to the brim with these wacky ass sound effects, like it's been edited like a goofy YouTube fails video. And yet, despite all that, it still has all this serious shit going on. The whole tone of the movie is this blend of comedy and drama that I haven't quite seen before, and it almost seems insensitive in some areas. There are many instances of people getting very emotional in this film. It's a little bit of a tearjerker. But I actually do think that all of these emotions are earned. Despite what I've been saying, despite how melodramatic it all seems, when these emotional beats did come, I was actually on board with the characters and I could still take it all seriously. Because in a lot of ways, it was almost as dark as something like The Shawshank Redemption, but the tone would imply otherwise. It's like this don't hug me I'm scared fever dream where everyone's in denial of how awful things are. The main villain, who is this nasty, mustache-twirling, hard-ass professor, he's played off like a whimsical kids movie villain, even though some of the shit he does throughout this movie is downright fucking deplorable. Borderline unforgivable, like he put so much pressure on that kid that he committed suicide. Rancho even accuses him at the funeral saying, this wasn't suicide, this was murder. Like, fuck you, buddy. I fucking hated this character. I thought he was a loathsome human being, but no, he's a goofy kid's character apparently. He's just a silly little villain. He pulls a Nurse Ratchet and literally like psychologically tortures his students. Oh, what would your parents think if they found out that you got expelled? Ooh, that wouldn't look good, would it? Ooh, and the fucking guy he's saying it to fucking jumps out like a 2-story building. Well, where is his professor? I want to kick his ass. But no, it isn't really like that. It's much more playful apparently. It's like, oh, why you little meddling kids? You put thumbtacks on my chair again. At the end of the film, him and Rancho finally see eye to eye, which was not the appropriate conclusion to that relationship. This guy is literally as bad as Nurse Ratchet, like, what the fuck is happening here? This film is gaslighting me. Aside from all that, this film continues to be utterly insane through other avenues. Again, a near 3-hour movie, and it's full to the brim of all of the overdramatic story conventions. Again, we had the young suicide, but there's also a moment where the 3 main characters have to help this woman deliver a baby, and it's this whole emergency because she can't get to the hospital. It's one of those scenes. A bride runs away from a wedding she didn't want, that's also in there. And finally, as a film about college, it has quite an abundance of things to say about the Indian education system. In fact, that's probably the mainline theme of the film, and that proved to be really enlightening and thought-provoking. The societal pressures around succeeding academically seem to be far more severe in India as opposed to other countries. So much so that many young adults end up taking their own lives due to the ghastly amount of pressure put on them. It's horrendous, and I imagine that this film fiercely resonated with Indian audiences for what it had to say about all this. That could be an additional reason as to why this is one of the most critically acclaimed Indian movies.
Success ke piche mat bhago. Excellence ka picha karo.
All in all, that was quite a delightful film, and I'd recommend anyone of any background to check that out. Give it a whirl. It's a little difficult assigning a numerical value to this film, as again, it is so bizarre, but then again, who gives a shit about number ratings? I was heavily stimulated by the profound statements made by the film. It gives you a lot to ponder and a lot to chew on. It keeps you engaged throughout the whole film, has lovable main characters, hateable villains. Deserves the popularity. Good film. All is well. And last but not least, well, I don't know, KAITHI. KAITHI, which translates to Prisoner, is a 2019 Tamil language film, so we've got a Bollywood movie on our hands. How about we take a look at this film? This is how it begins, it just hard cuts in, magical stuff. Boom, it's on now. So it's an action crime thriller set in modern day. It's clearly taken a lot of inspiration from the John Carpenter movie Assault on Precinct 13.
We'll make one last stand. It's pretty good to me. It's all we got.
Unfortunately, there are no dance numbers in this one. I'm sorry, not this time, buddy. Looking at the plot of the film and its dark tone, I struggle to see where they would have fit in a dance number. Wouldn't have really worked, but that hasn't stopped Bollywood in the past, has it? Yeah, that's a crock of shit. Like, that's ever fucking stopped them. Please don't human traffic my son. Nacho, 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 nacho. Wow, this anti-smoking watermark isn't distracting at all, particularly in the way it keeps coming and going. So the watermarks are only present for the shots where there's a literal cigarette on screen. So when you have these reverse shots in between these cigarette shots, it keeps disappearing then coming back again. I like how there's a literal murder being committed here and it's still like, be sure not to smoke. This main villain character, I like his voice, it's very deep and guttural. He'll be very intimidating, hopefully. I get I should be used to the dubbing by now, but this film takes things to the next level, it seems.
Market level, sir. 840 crores. 4 கட்டையும் ஆடுது. 3வது கேர் சரியா ஓடல. மொத்த டிபார்ட்மென்ட் பேரு கட்டறியா. ஏதாவது பண்ணியா. ரிட்டையர் ஆவற நேரத்துல மரியாதை ரிட்டையர் ஆவற.
The acting isn't very good either. The quality has dipped. All of the line deliveries are stilted and rushed. Like, I know it's not my language, but everyone speaks at such a ridiculously fast pace that it's headache inducing.
மச்சி, நான் தௌகடிட்ட வந்துட்டேன். நீ டானே கிட்ட நான் சொன்னத அந்த ஹை ஸ்கூல்ல வர சொல்லு.
போலீஸ் சார் இருக்காரா? யார் இல்லீங்களே சார். எஸ்ஐ இருக்காங்களா? எப்பே கரண்ட் இல்ல. ஸ்டேஷன்ல அதிகாரி யார் இல்லீங்களேயா? அவரோட மொபைல் நம்பர்.
Stop talking.
எனக்கு இன்னும் 5 மாசம் சர்வீஸ் தான் இருக்கு. கடைசி காலத்துல வெட்டு குத்து வாங்கிட்டு என்னால இழுத்துட்டுலாம் படுத்துட்டு இருக்க முடியாது. அதுக்கு இல்லங்கயா.
Slow down.
இந்த ட்ரக் ரோஹிப்னாலா இருக்கிறதுக்கு சான்சஸ் ஹையா இருக்கு. So doctor?
Oh, these fucking watermarks. Honestly, they might as well have just had the watermark be there the whole time just because of how much smoking and drinking there is in this film. It would have been far less distracting. At least I could have gotten used to it. And the whole film takes place at night as well, so these white watermarks really stick out. So all of these cops were having a party and someone spiked the sangria or something. They all pass out and now the Indian mafia are coming for them. The people still conscious, need to transport them somewhere safe. You know, all sounds pretty serious, doesn't it? So then we get this. That's one of the guys you're trying to save. Is that supposed to be funny? We're introduced to the badass convict anti-hero, and this is going to sound a bit rich and a little ironic coming from me, but this boy has a very boring voice. It was putting me to sleep.
தாடி வச்சா தப்பா
ஆட்ட நரி தின்ன கணக்கா ஒரு பக்கெட் பிரியாணி தனியா திட்டு குத்துக்கலாட்ட உட்கார்ந்திருக்கா அவனுக்கு மட்டும் எப்படி சார் உண்டாவல திருச்சி புள்ள காமாச்சி பிரியாணி இவ்வளவு ஃபேமஸ் தெரியுமா
My head hurts. Nice one. Stock door sound effect. I have to admit that during the start of this movie I was a little disinterested. I felt like I was watching something fairly formulaic. Something formulaic with poor acting, mind you. When it reached the 40-minute mark, however, it started to pick things up and I began to enjoy myself a bit more. Coincidentally, this was also the time we got the first action set piece. The action is definitely this film's strongest asset, but it's all hand-to-hand stuff, so it's a lot of fun. However, the only way that all of these action set pieces work is because apparently not one member of this huge drug gang possesses a firearm. All of these henchmen just have machetes or knives. It puts the characters in way less danger. Now, maybe I wouldn't usually complain about this, but throughout the film, you can really feel the absence of a gun. Like, there are situations where you say, okay, usually a gun would definitely be involved here, and it would make things so much more simpler for the villains. Like, it's a very noticeable thing, like, why is no one using a gun. Luckily for the good guys, the drug king always opted to have it out with fisticuffs instead, like the old-fashioned way. No one has a firearm, not one of these people. Are they extremely hard to come by in this universe? I'm just going to be respectful to the culture of India and just assume that guns are a hard commodity to come by in that country, in that nation. Kind of like they are in the UK, maybe. But then again, you can't have like a British gangster film without any guns. Despite all of that, the action is still decent, and the style of cinematography used really complements the scenes. You can clearly see what's going on at all times. There's lots of fluid camera movement and wide angles. We also have this comedic relief character who's quite annoying, but that's the point, he's supposed to be annoying. Somewhere, sometime, there was a person in the film industry who said, you know, it'd be a really good idea to have an intentionally annoying, goofy main character, because that's just a trope you see everywhere, but all we're left with is annoying characters at the end of the day. The music is way too overbearing here. There's also this strange jingle that's repeatedly played throughout the film. It goes like din 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 din. It just so slightly sounds like an iMovie effect, so every time I heard it, it threw me off a little. One of the biggest issues that this film faces is the length, because this is a 90-minute concept, not a 2-hour, 19-minute one. It would have been appropriate for this to be a much shorter film, and it would have gone down so much easier as well. Instead, it really drags on, and seeing as though it's a very simple plot with fairly weak acting, it doesn't provide as much of a good experience. There just isn't enough in here to engage you for over 2 hours, so it gives you so many opportunities to get bored. There was even an intermission that did not need to be there. Like, this isn't Hateful Eight. The original Assault on Precinct 13 film is only an hour and a half. I just don't get what happened to these under 2-hour Friday night movies. Like, why does everything have to be over 2 hours, even if it's like a fucking Marvel film? These terrible producers have the gall to take up over 2 hours of my precious time. No thank you. Later on in the film, there's this one character who sadly gets his throat cut, and we were supposed to really care about this character because moments earlier he just had a scene where he talks to his girlfriend and he says, "I love you, by the way, I've always loved you," or whatever. Like, before that, I literally had no idea who this person was. Are you laughing or crying? Luckily, things started to vamp up near the end with the climactic action set piece. There's a cool scene with a Gatling gun, so I guess guns aren't that hard to come by after all then. Hey, that was clearly supposed to be the bit that sold the audience on how great this film was, and I don't think it was as awesome as the filmmakers thought it was. It did look fairly wonky, a lot of it was done with obvious CGI. In the end, I did come round to care about the characters just enough to enjoy the resolution. Again, this film possesses all of the scenes needed to make up for a decent, goofy, 90-minute action film. It just also has all of this unnecessary extra additional stuff that makes for quite a slog of a movie. God, fucking brilliant delivery there. It's great to rip on child performances, isn't it? This was definitely the weakest film of the bunch, which is sad seeing as though it's the one we're ending on. Out of all 5 films, it was the least interesting and least engaging. I can imagine to someone native to the Indian film scene, this is quite stale and formulaic. It's still better than NAAGIN, or whatever the fuck that was called.
All my life I waited to do something for the batcho.
So here we are, we've watched 5 films and a soap opera, or whatever the hell that was supposed to be. What have we learned? What have we learned about the Indian film scene and Indian culture in general? Remember, this is judging from my limited exposure. We're looking at a very narrow selection of data here. That being said, let's rip on an entire culture. God, haven't us British done enough to the nation of India? Yes, we fucking have. Holy shit, we have really fucked them over in the past. A key aspect of Indian cinema that I've discovered is something that I think most people will be able to pick up on by just watching a few clips of Bollywood movies or TV shows, and that being the ridiculously overt method to telling a story. Compared to the average American film, the average Indian film contains storytelling that is much more in your face and obvious.
ध्यान से अपना काम पूरा करके आओ अवंतिका, अगर तुम सावधान न रही और पकड़ी गई।
चुप इस साल
बार बार कहा है उस बात को मत दोहराया कर।
Everything that the filmmakers want to convey to the audience is done so in this loud and unmistakable manner, and I mean this in every department of filmmaking. The editing is schizophrenic with an overabundance of freeze frames and zoom-ins. The acting is melodramatic and ham-fisted as if they were trying to hold the attention of a very young child. The screen is overcrowded with flamboyant bright colours of every kind. The music and score are often over-dramatic and or over-present. The amount of CGI used within singular set pieces is ridiculous and indulgent. Despite not having the budget to pull a certain effect off, they still go full send on said effect, resulting in a giant CGI creature that looks completely unpolished. The presentation of the stories is dumbed down to such an extreme degree. In many ways, they treat their audiences like babies. The frequent use of disclaimer watermarks that appear over top actual scenes from the film ties into this. They do not perceive their audiences to be very intelligent people, seeing as though they feel the need to remind them when CGI is in use. The anti-drinking / anti-smoking messaging is delivered to the audience in such a manner of communication that a mother would exhibit when addressing her toddler. Not to mention how militant it is to crudely brand someone else's art with your own agenda, and to make this a mandatory requirement when making a movie. Like, all of that noise can go fuck itself. That's the very negative extent to this mentality around storytelling that the Indian film industry apparently has. Those are some of the worst aspects to how they make their movies. So bringing things back to something a little more positive, like the cinematography, again, it's very in your face, but throughout this watch through, I was subjected to some very lively and expressive shots. With films like BAAHUBALI and Three Idiots, it felt as though the camera had a mind of its own due to how energetic things could get. Now this might sound condescending, but something else that I gather when watching these films is that the filmmakers aren't as arsed about having the most convincing and naturalistic performances in their movies. I think the actors are definitely encouraged to cheese it up, but that might be a part of the culture, like it's supposed to be more whimsical and silly. They don't take their films as seriously as America or other countries do. Maybe this is what acting is all about for them, being overly animated and absorbing, similar to how Japanese cinema from the 50s would usually contain acting that was of a far more theatrical and over-the-top nature. Common reoccurring tropes that I kept seeing included the film taking place in an elevated reality with these normal main characters having partial superhuman abilities. Sometimes the main character would have a goofy and slapstick demeanour, almost as if they were in a comedy movie. However, at the same time, he'd retain a substantial level of strength and competence. He'd still be an accomplished hero despite being a little quirky on the side. I noticed this with BAAHUBALI as well as the aforementioned RRR, which is the same director as BAAHUBALI. The love interests as well as the women in general are always dressed in these ornate princess-like robes. This is obviously more to do with Indian culture itself, but it made for a nice contrast in the visuals, a good excuse to have an abundance of intricate and pretty costumes on screen. I do also find this distinct style of Indian fashion to be quite cool, dressing up in ways that Westerners may view as old-timey or of a different era. Again, it just provides a good aesthetical contrast contrast to what I'm used to seeing. I started noticing in Shaheed that whenever there was talks of a marriage, bangles and bracelets would often be involved. Then again, bangles and bracelets are all over the place in these films. Women always have loads of them on. They're very pretty, they're also really cool to see. If there's anyone in the comments who wants to enlighten me, because I vaguely know about the marriage dowries, and I was wondering if like these bangles and bracelets were like an integral part of that, or just a traditional part of the wedding ceremony. I really don't fucking know. The films are also quite celebratory of religion. I think Indian films are more celebratory of Hinduism than Western films are of Christianity. Religion just seems to be a bit more present in their films than it is in ours. Because we're all a bunch of cynical fucking godless cretins. Specifically through Three Idiots, I learnt a lot about the Indian education system and how fucked up it is, or was, how amplified the pressure to be academically inclined is, how militaristic certain colleges are. I wouldn't survive a day under that regime, Jesus. Again, I'm just going off the Three Idiots movie. Maybe it's not like that at all. Maybe the schooling system over there is wonderful, I don't know. I get all of my worldly education from movies. I didn't even know what the Holocaust was until I watched Schindler's List at age 18. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, I learned that song and dance has always been an integral part of Indian cinema. These musical intervals are a mainstay tradition dating as far back as the 30s. Films and musicals, I suppose, have just always been far more keenly interweaving mediums in India compared to how they are in other parts of the world, which is also very, very, very interesting. Again, this knowledge has mostly been sourced from just the act of watching movies, so to an extent we should take things with a grain of salt. Having said that, a nation's art always reflects its culture, so stick that up your ass. Even though I've already just done all that, if I was to do a ranking, because you all just love ranking, you stupid degenerates, from worst to best, it would be KAITHI at the bottom. That was the most challenging one to get through. Then above that would be TUMBBAD, which wasn't perfect, but had some unique horror aspects to it. And then above that, we'd have BAAHUBALI, The Beginning, which had a lot of wonky storytelling, but it was a fun ride, and I did learn a lot about the Indian blockbuster. At second place, we'd have Shaheed. Of course, that was more so a classical film, but it had a very powerful story. And finally, at the top, we have Three Idiots. I enjoyed it the most. It was very stylistic, very expressive and animated. Had some very strong performances and some very likable characters, and its overall message was very heartwarming. And again, it was the better part of 3 hours, and for the most part, I didn't feel that length. Oh, and with that, we are done. Yeah, that's it. That's the end, boys and girls. I enjoyed this investigation / exploration into Indian cinema. Watching films of different cultures always proves to be at least a little bit enriching, even if you only learn specific small things at a time. I hope you enjoyed this. Maybe you even found this enriching, which would be amazing. I just overall hope that this proves to be a somewhat entertaining and educational video. But seriously though, if you've stuck around for this long as well, thanks a million. You are a god. You're a god in human clothing. Now, what you've done for me there by just watching this video to the end is just like something that I just don't deserve, so thank you. Peace out, suckers.